All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Sullivan. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect at Itential. And the focus of my presentation today will be building low-code network automation. So basically leveraging some of the technologies and the integrations and the adapters from the previous section and actually starting to string some of those together and building end-to-end use cases. As we've already sort of covered today, we think that Itential is uniquely positioned to provide benefit to both NetOps and DevOps teams, whether that's our low-code workflow canvas, our ability to do data transformations, even our ability to provide drag and drop JSON forms and various kinds of templating, whether it's Jinja templating, TextFSM, and a few other examples we'll actually cover today. We think the platform is positioned well to actually offer unique value to both NetOps and DevOps processes. Again, the focus of the demo today will be largely in the orchestration phase. So that means taking these unique tasks from multiple different domains and actually putting them together and stringing them together with the hopes of creating an end-to-end automation. And we'll, of course, leverage the adapters and the integrations and automation gateway that we covered previously. Our use case today is simply a new site gaining access to a web server in AWS. And so what we'll do is actually orchestrate changes across the data center, across our security environment using Panorama, and also make some changes in the cloud to the AWS security group. And sadly, that's it for my slides. I know some people probably want to see more slides, but we're going to jump into the demo here. First, what I want to cover is this is the end-to-end workflow that we're going to talk about today. And it starts over here on the left. And there's a data transformation there where we actually take some input data and transform it a bit. And then on the top here, we're actually going to go off and create a Panorama post rule. So we're going to make an adapter call into Panorama, and that's that green box right here. In the middle, we're actually going to make a change to the AWS security group. I'm not really going to spend a ton of time talking about this purple box here is actually going in and creating a change in ServiceNow. Later on, we're going to create a file and commit a file into GitLab to get a pipeline going that's going to do some validation for us. But we're going to focus mostly on these green tasks. So creating the security post rule, authorizing the security group in AWS, and then we have the data center programming that we're going to do down here. Now, the first part of the automation really that we're going to focus on is actually generating a form. So I've actually got sort of a form halfway set up. So let's take a look at that. So here's kind of my form that I have set up today. And I can actually preview that quickly and show you. So you can you're going to add a source IP address, you're going to select the web server. Luckily, we only have one, so the customer actually doesn't have the ability to select the wrong one. And they're going to actually select the data center. Now, what the form will actually do is if I show, it's actually going to map those into the device name, the destination IP, and then the source IP. Now, we need one more element for the form, so I'm actually going to create that for us now. So we're going to have another drop down here, and we'll actually add the port. So we'll add a setting for the port here. And it'll be port. We're going to require that you add that. In this case, we're going to add some options in here. Now, I'm going to just do it statically, but of course you could do it dynamically, right? So you can go off to an external system that we actually have an adapter set up from, and actually pull data live from an adapter or an integration, and then use that in your form. But in our case, we're going to do it statically. So we'll have HTTP or possibly HTTPS as our examples here. So we've just done another example of us trying to refine and control the set of options that a particular user can actually add when they're actually interacting with the automation itself. So if I go back, that looks pretty good. I'm going to save that off. Oh, yeah, I'll save that. And then I'm going to save the form itself. So that looks pretty good. So now I'm kind of excited. I got my form done. If I jump back at my automation here, you'll also see that there's a transformation here. And sadly, the format of the data that comes out of that form is not necessarily in line with what all these other API-based systems are going to need. So we actually have to create a transformation to address this. But let's go back first to that form, and we'll just preview it here. I'm going to capture some output, and you'll see immediately why I'm doing that. So I'll just type some silly IP address in here. In this case, it's just a test case. It doesn't really matter. I'll select the web server. And down here, I'm going to select the data center. I'll show that. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm just going to take a copy of that. And then I'm going to go back to Automation Studio, and I'm actually going to create a transformation. I'll show you what I mean in just a second here. We'll call this NFD31B form, because we're going to work on some form data. So let's see what happens. Oh. Okay. So with these transformations, what I can actually do is I can define an incoming schema. Now, turns out that I kind of know what the incoming format is, right? It's this, it's the output of that JSON form. So I'm going to infer the schema from that. I'm just going to call this form data. And you'll see here that we've got some schema around the source port, the destination. I'm just going to save that off. And now what I can actually do here, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here. Let's see. What you'll see me do is now I'm going to drag the source over here, and I'll add an output schema. So now other tasks on the canvas will actually be able to reference this JST and just grab the source. They don't have to deal with this whole object. So I'm going to do that for a couple of these. So that's going to make it pretty easy if you just want to get a single field for an API call or something like that. And maybe you just want to know what the device name is. All right, so that's pretty good. But unfortunately, some of the API calls that we're going to make today require a little bit more massaging of the data, a little bit more transformation. So for example, if I go to if I want to create an ingress rule for a security group in AWS, they actually need a CIDR prefix. So I can create that in the JST as well. So I'll put the /32 here because I'm just going to use my source address here. And then I can just do the same thing. I can drag this over the outgoing schema and save it. I already know what the format of this is. I'll call it source with CIDR. And it's going to be a string as well. We can save that quickly. Okay. And then I can just drag this over again and connect it up to that element right there. That looks pretty good. And lastly, we also have several artifacts that we're going to interface with that actually require an array of devices. So not just a single device name like we have, but actually an array. So in that case, we'll quickly add that. So we'll use the push call here. And so we'll start with an empty array, and we'll just add our device name to it. So I'm going to drag and drop that over here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to create a quick output schema to take this. And this one here is going to be called device array. And it's going to be of type array. All right, I'm going to save that. And so now I've got that defined on my output schema as well. So now I'll just connect into that. All right, and that actually looks pretty good. I'm going to save that. But before I actually jump in and start trying to reference this, let's make sure that everything we've done here works. So I'll actually try that. So I've got the data that I inputted here. And if I run this, we should see the outgoing fields get populated. If down the bottom here, we can't really see that. So really see if I make it a little bit bigger. Well, I guess I can enlarge this, sorry. But we actually have the source, port, destination, device name. We've got the source with the CIDR IP, and we've got an array. So now we can actually start using some of this data later on in the automation. So again, we've gone from the user input, transforming that data, and trying to make it a little bit easier so that we can now make sure that whatever format those API calls demand, we can actually satisfy that. And lastly, before we jump back into the canvas and start plugging all this in, we actually have another part of the automation in which we're going to program the data center switch. We're actually going to add a router or something like that. I'm not the CCIE expert here, but my colleague gracefully provided some config for me. But what I really want to do is I want to sort of templatize this. So I want to match, I'm going to generate config that's roughly based on the input that I had to the form. So if I just paste that here, you'll see here down the bottom, it looks like it renders okay. But what I really want to do is start to reference the source data that was passed in. So I'm just going to type in the source here. And that looks pretty good. It looks like it added that in there. I can do it again over here. This is the second place I need to. Let's see if I spelled that right. Okay, and so it looks like my config is rendering roughly the way that I think it should. So that's good. So my template works. So now, depending on what data comes in, I'll actually generate the appropriate config. I'll just save this off. Now I'll go back to the canvas and start trying to plug in some of these tasks. Now, a lot of them already on here already have, we'll start here with this JST that we created. And the one we created was NFD 31B Form 2, I think. All right. And in this case, we're gonna pass as input to this form data, which is the object that is the JSON object that will come into the automation based on the form data. So that's how we're going to start that. Okay. And now if we go over here, these green tasks are already populated with the exception of this one here. This is a stub, and we'll have to drag that in. But first off, let's take a look at this. And here's the call for Panorama, but luckily we actually have, if you notice over here, we've got another JST that's actually creating the payload for this Panorama call. Now, basically what we did in that JST is we got the schema for an API call, and we just dropped it in there, and we'll populate it, and we'll reference that. So let's see, we'll reference that Panorama JST for the query. We'll do the same thing down here for the create payload. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we're all set there. Now this is just a stub task, so I have to search for this one. So let's see. And here it's authorized security group ingress is the task. When I drag that task onto the canvas, let's see, I'll double click on it here. First, I'll get rid of all this text. Makes the box too wide. Okay, so what you can see here is all of these arguments here. These aren't Itential specific. This is basically what's in the API call. So when we ingested an open API spec, these are the set of arguments that this API call requires. You'll see here that I'm not really able to select anything other than static, meaning I could type it in here. But that's going to change in just a second. So now if I connect it into the canvas here, let's do that. I go back in here again. For CIDR IP, let's reference that NFD form 31, that second form there. And I know that I need the source with CIDR, right? And I created that, so I'll just drop it in here. The same thing from the port. So I've gone down here, and let's see, I got a port. For IP protocol, it's going to be TCP. And we got 2 port down here we need to fill out. We'll just add that in here. So now you can see it's pretty straightforward to actually take that data that I mapped from that I ingested from a user and transformed and actually leverage it here in the workflow. And the last thing that we really need is the AWS security group, and that's the only thing that I'm going to have to grab from my. So I think this is, we've been using the same SG for this call. Yeah, so I grabbed the security group, so I'll just put it in there. And I think that's all AWS is going to need to add that ingress security rule here. Now I'll just I'll delete that tab, that stub task, and I'll put the real one down here. And then the last thing we need to do is we've got that template that we just used, right? And I'll just grab the name of that template so I can plug it in over here. So the template here was nfd31b_config, so I'll just grab that. Go back to Automation Studio here, and I'll put the name of that template in here. And then obviously, just as we did in that JSON, when we built that JSON template, all we really did is pass in the form data. So let's edit that a bit. That's just going to be that same form data. So I can just save that away here. And then I think over here at Itential CLI, we need, this is an array for actually the task that will go through the gateway to actually push the config. Actually, we'll take the hosts in an array. So we're actually going to have to go back and reference that same JST, and we're going to use that device array. So now we've got the device in array. Looks like we're good to go. And then we're going to reference just another JST where we took the output of that JST and we took the output of that Ginger template and put it in an array so we can pass it down to the device. And now we've kind of gone through and created an automation that will touch not only the panorama controller, will modify an AWS security group ingress rule, and will also push some config out to the data center switch. And that's it for my demo here.
When you're doing the forms and stuff, do you have a validation of IPv4 IP address as part of a form, because that gets screwed up sometimes?
Yes, absolutely. So actually, if you looked at, and I didn't really show that, but that's a really good point here. Let's see over here quickly, if we go back into the form here, you can even see here that that right now the setting is set to IPv4, right? So I actually set that, so you have to at least add a valid IP address. And then I could have done a little bit more validation over here. Maybe I have a regex, maybe there's something specific, and maybe I'm doing some dynamic validation where I'm going out to an external system. So all those things.
Right. So all my naming conventions stuff can be validated here, so they don't screw up the world.
Right, exactly. Why go, 3/4 of the way through your automation only to find out that someone mistyped or didn't use the proper method, didn't use the way that you had it defined. Yeah.
And then lastly, sorry.
That's all right. That's great.
On this form, is it capable of making a call either before or in the form to pull from my source of truth for things like IP address and DNS names and things of that nature?
Yeah. So
again, the end user can't screw that up on me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So here we just did it statically. Frankly, if I had a little bit more time, we probably could have done something more dynamic, but here's where you actually reference any of the adapters that you have. So you can now start doing, and you can actually transform that data as well to what you want to show and how you want to filter it out. So yes, you can definitely do that.
I have a question about your validation on there with, I saw you had either IPv4 or legacy IP, or the current IP, IPv6. There's no way to have both at the same time validated?
Yes. So you could have had a type where you could have had either. Yeah. So you could have defined you could have defined it to be both. Yeah. I didn't do that either, but yes, you can do that.